grew up, they'd renovate our houses slowly throughout the years, and my mom and dad would tell a story, and they didn't know. My mom's like, we had no books, no internet. We would just like go to the hardware store, buy some drywall, and just go home and try to figure it out. We have no idea what we're doing. But now, like, there's people on their free time just showing you exactly how to do it. We're in the greatest time ever. So the more you do it, like, the easier it comes.
My name is Darson Grantham, real estate agent with Keller Williams. Next month, December 8th, I believe I have someone canned in to speak on creative financing, taking over loans, assuming loans, sub-2, how to get owner carryback type financing. Those of you that have not been here, thanks for coming. Those of you that have been here, thanks for coming. If you don't know, this event is the second Tuesday every single month. We have it booked out here at the Iowa Tap Room. I'll talk for 10 minutes-ish about what's going on in the market as a local real estate agent, just what I'm hearing, absolutely network, find someone that can educate you on the market. That's very important to being an investor. So last month we talked a lot about the rent rates with Brad Neal with Renters Warehouse of just, hey, what are rents actually doing? I listen to a lot of content on YouTube, on podcasts, and there is a lot of content out there right now about nationally how the rents are. Are they going down? What do they look like? What exactly is going on? And I'm pretty confident in saying that the rental rates in Des Moines are not going down unless you skew the data in an odd way that makes no sense to any logical person. So that's that. That was last week. Next month, December 8th, I believe I have someone canned in to speak on creative financing, taking over loans, assuming loans, sub-2, how to get owner carryback type financing. So that's going to be a pretty, with the market of the shift we've seen, it's something that every investor that I talk to has questions on of how it works, what does it look like, what do we do, how do we make offers that way, on market, off market. Can you see on the MLS if a property can be bought on contract, which the answer to that is yes. Well, what those terms look like, how to make them work. Last month, I talked a little bit about data, and I had a few comments that people would like to see the slides as we talk through the data, just because it's tough to follow along with what I'm saying. Totally understand that. Unfortunately, I'm not going to bring a presentation up because it's a 10-minute segment. So I will have these slides available. If you scan your QR code or scan that QR code, I'll email these slides after the event. Like, you'll get them, and also we'll post this YouTube video or post this recording on my YouTube channel. So you absolutely can get a replay of it, get the slides. It's not my data. It is from Les Solgrove and Simply Des Moines. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. The investors that I work with, they struggle a little bit with just putting offers in. And as an agent, I can understand the concern of pissing off the selling agent or the seller by putting in unrealistic offers. The last 2 weeks, I've seen unrealistic offers come to fruition. So my point in that is, if you are looking at putting in deals together or buying deals and are pre-approved, put the offer in. Like, the reason I say that, the median sale price versus the median list price. In Des Moines, I have two slides, less put together. This is the only thing I'm going to talk on. The median list price was $350, and the median sale price was $260. That's median, right? So it's a type of average. But the point of that is not everything is selling at list price. If you look at the decrease of list price versus the decrease of sale price from September to October, it's drastically more on the sale price than the list price, meaning people are listing their properties for prices that are unrealistic. Year over year, we're basically flat from October to October. So there's not last month, September, we were about, I think it was like 7% year over year increase in prices, median sale price. October, we're flat. And it looks like November of last year, we're down probably another 3 or 4%. And that's just the cyclical way the market, November closings are another 3 or 4%. That's very typical. If we beat that, if 2022 is lower than that price, then we would be down a percentage year over year. So I will report on that next year or next month. But that's just something I wanted to just public announcement. If you are putting offers in, or if you're not and you want to put them in. But he also has a really cool story of transitioning into full-time real estate. What can go wrong? What can go right? And I'm going to kind of quiz him on his path. Before real estate, like, what was your mindset? What were you doing? Did you have a full-time job, W-2, self-employed? What's that look like?
Before real estate, there was a moment I was homeless because Darson kicked me out of his house because he was going to expand the family. So he said, hey, teenager Calvin, get out of here. Before real estate, when I graduated out of UNI in 2009, I was supposed to be applying for some jobs, and I've always worked my entire life, so I moved back home to work with my brother who does concrete construction. And after about 5 months living in a small town, I was like, man, this is gonna be the rest of my life if I don't change something here. So I should probably go back and utilize the skills I just paid for 4 years at university, which was electronic media video production. So I went back, moved up to Waterloo, Cedar Falls, started doing some freelance videography, whatever I could do, web videos. And one little gig turned into another gig, and then 10 years went by, and so for a decade I was self-employed with various clients, creating web videos, promotional videos, doing some documentary work. So never a W-2 employee. Ever since college, I've been very fortunate and grateful to be self-employed. I'm not sure how that panned out besides just showing up and doing some good work and word of mouth.
Okay, so starting out in real estate, like what was the first, like who brought it to your attention first, or why?
Yeah, in regards to real estate, probably kind of a business partner, mentor, friend of mine, Adam Carroll. He speaks on financial literacy. We did some projects together, and he had some rental properties, and he was looking to, I think, sell his last one or so. But I think more so probably what's important in there is the whole idea of investing. And when I was sitting behind my computer for many years, I had stumbled onto a blog called Mr. Money Mustache, which basically his whole story was him and his wife retired by age 30. And that like shook my brain. I was like, how is that possible? Because you're supposed to work till you're 60 years old and then you retire. And his whole story goes, he said, here's basically the simple math to early retirement. The retirement is essentially a math equation of you should have X amount of money to be able to live for the last 20 years of your life or something like that. So upon reading that and like digging into his blog, I just loved his whole philosophy, the financial literacy aspect, just his approach to life. And I was like, yeah, sweet, I need to be investing in the stock market, some form. If you want time freedom, you got to invest your hard-earned dollars to buy that. So I'd say that's what turned me into the whole idea of freedom was investing. So invest in the stock market traditionally, whether it's like IRA, long-term investment accounts, and then eventually stumbled into real estate.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Money Mustache, that equation is basically if you live on half of your income for 15 years, you can retire, right? Like that's really simple, easy math. So I did not know that I didn't know you liked Mr. Money Mustache. Big fan. Real estate-wise, your first property to when you went full-time into real estate, that transition, give me what was that time period? And what year was it?
Yeah, so maybe before I get to that question, I should finish that little thought around the whole Mr. Money Mustache and investing, because this is what made me do the jump on real estate. Adam Carroll had, I think, alluded to me. He's like, man, you should maybe buy this little duplex. It'd be great for you. I think you'd love it. And I had been of the mindset I wanted zero responsibilities in my life. I had just been living in my car, climbing some mountains, just living out west. And I always wanted a lot of...
More than climbing mountains.
More than climbing mountains. It's another story. But I wanted low responsibilities, and ownership comes with those things. So I was always the guy who rented a buddy's bedroom to keep my cost of living low, to live on half of my income. And so Mr. Money Mustache was pretty big on index funds. And if I was to go into this whole, I'll try to keep it short, but stock market investing, essentially just set it and forget it. Index funds, you can't beat the math long term with it. There's an article out there with Warren Buffett, the $1 million bet that he had with one of the top active fund managers out there. And he basically said, we're going to see if we just put money into an index fund versus one of the world's top performing active portfolio managers, what's going to come out ahead in a decade. And long story long, it was index funds. But anyway, so back to bridging these two ideas, this opportunity to buy a little duplex. And so Calvin, who wanted zero responsibility and ownership in his life, but does love spreadsheets. I've probably built a few thousand in my life out of hobbies, I don't know. And I put down a spreadsheet and said, okay, let's just look at a scenario over 10 years. If I continue to contribute this amount of money into an index fund, and I'll assume historic return of 10%, or whatever the math was. And then let me assume if I use the same money and put it into this little rental property, the information that I knew, like a loan pay down and cash flow, variables that I could actually assume. And what does this look like over a long-term view, 10 years? And so I was like, A, B, very logical. I was like, well, holy shit, wait a minute, I should definitely try this duplex thing. And I was definitely worried and scared because of the whole responsibility factor. And I was like, well, kick some cans for a while. And after 6 months, pulled the trigger. And I thought, worst case, I can sell the property. I could put a sign in the yard. If I hate mowing lawns and fixing water heaters and painting stuff, I could sell it. I could maybe make some money, break even. Or even if I lose some money, at least I will have known and tried. I can close that loop in my brain to try the investment. And so October 6th, 2017, I moved into my first little duplex, and it took me a month with my mom to paint the little thing. It was learn how to paint. Terrible.
Nope, hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed.
Okay, so that was the first property. Once you did that, what was the next? So those of you who don't know, well, we'll just get into this. What was the next like mindset change? So you move in the first one, you're like, okay, that's it. Like you fix it up, and then
I've made it.
You've made it, yeah.
I have made it. I made it when it became a reality, when all day long you could sit there and compute on a spreadsheet that when someone gives you a rent check and you put it into the bank that like it helps. And then it was that moment when my first tenant, Jessica, gave me a rent check, like, hey, it's the first of the month. And I was like, go to the bank. I was like, holy shit, this is real. Like this actually works. It probably through practice unlocks something. That's just the way I am. I have to like physically go through it. Everyone in the audience might be like, well, duh, yeah, that works in theory and whatever. So I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then a buddy of mine, he had a duplex they were Airbnb-ing. In our friend circle, he was one of the first ones kind of put on his big boy pants and get into home ownership. And he just kind of showed me his numbers. Like, holy crap, that's amazing.
That was Airbnb in like 17? 18?
That was Airbnb in like 2016, 17.
Yeah.
But more so, it got me thinking between that interaction of what Brett showed me of his little app, and I think somewhere in there, I picked up the book or came across it, Building Wealth One House at a Time, in which the guy talks about what your life looks like and how you can, change your life pretty dramatically and drastically by purchasing 10 houses over 10, 20 years, and how you can totally do it, and it's absolutely conceivable. And he shows you different ways to do it, but more so he like kind of lays out, the rough numbers side by side. Like if you don't buy any houses versus if you own 10 houses in 10 years between, cash flow and loans, pay downs, all that stuff, how does your life look very different? And so like reading that, I was like, oh yeah, this is realistic. Like I could buy a house a year. I could move once a year to a new primary home, like another duplex or something. So between kind of like noodling on that book, I got thinking, I was like, okay, here's the plan for the next 10 years. Well, I'm in year one. For the next 9 years, if I can buy a house by age 40, I'll have my 10 little houses and I'll have reached success, which I'll have also reached Mr. Money Mustache's like retirement savings money account number, which was like, for me, it was like $400,000 or something like that. And so anyways, in this book, so I was sitting there, I was like, and then between that interaction with the Airbnb and my first tenant giving me rent, I was like, well, wait a minute, if I would move out of my unit and buy another duplex, so 4 total units, 3 units would cover my complete cost of living. I'd be living for free. Because the first duplex, it's not tenant one unit, it's not gonna cover all your costs, but it was like 2/3. But 3 out of 4 units, I'd have free living. So I was like, I need to find another property immediately. That was probably 6 months in. And so within 6 months or 8 months, I stumbled upon a package deal. And in my first year, so within 8 months, I went from 0 to 6 units. I bought 3 duplexes. And I came across a package deal. The individuals had owned them for 30 years.
How did you come across
How did I find them? Actually, it's a great question. I was pretty down in the dumps because I'd been looking at the MLS and stuff. There's just garbage out there, and I was doing some tours with an agent. And I was like, well, maybe it's just not the right time. But I do remember that day, I don't know what happened in my life. I'm an emotional roller coaster. And I was in a crappy mood, and I was just like driving down University Ave. But I'd been looking for like a month or so. And then I saw a little sign for sale by owner, and I said, let me turn right. So I turned right. There's a duplex right there for sale by owner. So I pulled up into there, and I'm like, okay, I guess I was meant to be here for this moment. And I take a photo of the number in the yard, and I thought, I will call them tomorrow. Like I took the number, I'll call them tomorrow. And I thought, and I think something came out, I always have a lot of thoughts. So somewhere along there, I probably, just that same day, Seth Godin had sent out an email, something about taking action immediately. And I was like, Calvin, don't leave this driveway until you call those people. Why wouldn't you just call them now? And so I called them and talked to him, get the specs on this duplex. And then in the phone call, the lady's like, oh, and we're also selling a second one around the corner. It doesn't have to be a package deal, but it'd be great to work with one person. And I think I'm still on the path of this question. So I said, yeah, I would love to see them tomorrow. And I was not looking to buy 2 more properties. I just thought 1 more property for sure. But I went and toured both of them. And these individuals owned them for 30 years. They were taken very well care of. And I thought, wow, this takes care of year 2 and 3 goal right now. It meets all the boxes. I'm 100% in on this because I understand just a duplex and it makes sense to these tenants. And it would take every single penny I had in my life to do it. I was like, yep, we're doing this right now.
So something I'm going to point out here is just the fact that, yes, I am a real estate agent. There's agents in here. But you do not need agents to find really good deals. You have to take action. So yes, agents can bring you deals. Yes, you can find deals on your own. If you're looking for the gold mine deal, it's probably not going to come through an agent. So do the action yourself, which is one thing I wanted to point out in this entire speech is that exact story. I didn't know that exact story, but in general, that's not the only deal you've done like that either, right? Like, tell me about the other deals you bought without an agent, which is most of them.
Yeah, I've probably done quite a few deals. So, quick backstory. I mean, currently at 20 properties, 30 some units, and how many have I done them with an agent? Maybe half or less. So yeah, my first 3 properties, there was no agent involved. The second, third one, I did end up using an agent because he'd been shopping stuff around. I was still kind of like leery, like I hope I'm doing this correctly, you know. And then I get like a purchase agreement. I go through it, and I'm like, that's all it takes to buy a house, and you know, like I was like, I'm in on this. But what was the question as far as I got some
just
other
like finding deals. How do you do
finding
them?
deals? Yep. So shortly after that, I think my fourth one was an agent deal. They flipped a house, I got that. But property number 5 was unique, in which I was sharing my story with people. So I was just actively letting them know that, like, yeah, I'm into like buying rental properties, and this is kind of what I do. And you know, a lot of this stuff might be by chance, and I will like take gratitude for great fortune and chance in my life. I will also acknowledge, you know, speaking up and putting some action. It seems like action favors luck a little bit. So by sharing my story with people kind of actively, there's a gentleman, I was still doing video work at the time, and I just did an interview with this gentleman, Steve Cannon, kind of a Des Moines local athlete guy, cool dude. And I just did a project with him, and we'd had lunch, and a couple days later he calls me, he's like, hey, he goes, you know, I'm also a real estate investor, but I'm now kind of living up in Alaska, and long story long, this house I used to live at, sweet old lady, she's looking to sell it, thought maybe you'd be interested in, like, I don't know if you want it or not, but maybe check it out, right? And I thought, okay, cool. So called sweet little old lady up, Audrey, go meet her, 90-year-old lady, you know, her husband, they've had properties for 30 years. He had passed away 10 years ago, and it's like the final one. She's like, to be honest with you, I'm just like looking to let go of this thing. I don't want to be a property manager and such anymore. And that was one of the first ones where I didn't really have any money, but this was a great one for buying on contract. So for the first time, I got to experience this whole world of buying on contract, in which this sweet old lady would bankroll me, meaning she owned the property outright. She continued wanted the cash flow and such. I had only a small down payment. She was looking to remove the responsibility, the maintenance, the property management, all that aspect, and she wanted a 10-year deal to go into a trust for her kids and such. So again, good fortune, but I worked a deal with her in which, to this day, it's one of my favorite monthly checks that goes out, you know, because she's the bank, and it's a bought on contract deal.
Okay, so time frame between having your other job or other business bring in money from when you went full time, like what was that time period? What did you have to get to? What made you pull the trigger of like, screw it, I'm done with the rest of the stuff. I'm only doing real estate.
Yep. So for probably the last few years of my previous career, video production and such, I was just starting to get the itch to do something different. And I just didn't know what it was, so I continued doing client work. It was comfortable, you know, I still solved people's problems, I had fun doing it, but there's still like this itch to do something different after a decade. So deal number maybe 6 or so, I don't know, we gotta get every single number of them. But I got this house in January of 2020, I recall, in Beaverdale. And at this point, I didn't know, like most of my stuff has been like turnkey. I've had to like paint some walls, and I think that was it, like paint some walls. So pretty hands off, which is pretty awesome. But in January of 2020, again, I share my story. I think I was pretty active, always just like sharing financial literacy stuff online, just like things I was passionate about. And someone in my network who was a financial advisor had a client who they were looking to sell a property. In the family, I think someone's grandfather built the house. So I go look at this little property in Beaverdale, and I'm thinking, I walk through it, it's tenant occupied, and I'm like, yeah, this thing all day has to be worth like, you know, $130,000 or something. And I negotiate with them and buy this house for $93,000. And then I think I close in February or so. And upon closing, I'm like, hey, this is great because it's already tenant occupied. And then about a week or two later, I get a notice that says, hey, we're not going to renew our lease and we're out of here. And I'm like, damn it, I got to go in there and do a little bit of work, but it's okay. I'll get in there, I'll put my paint scheme on the wall, and I'll rent this baby. So I get in there with all their crap out of there finally, and I'm like, I kind of just bought a shithole. Like it needs some TLC. Do you want me to tell this whole quick fast rehab story?
No, yeah,
is this the accidentally rehab the house?
Yes, because the rehab is.
This is the jumping off point. So first house, October of 2017. Now we're in March of 2020. Anyone fast math? Like 3 years. At this point, I have like 6 properties, 6 or 7. And so I get in this house, and again, I know very little about. At this point, I still know very little about properties. But I know I'm looking at this thing that doesn't look right, and it's called the furnace. And this thing looks excessively large, unlike any furnace I've ever seen in my life for a small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. And this furnace is what's called a gravity furnace. So there's no forced air, no blower, just naturally rises up. It looks like a giant octopus. It takes up half the basement. And so I'm in there, and I'm like, Well, it works, right? But most likely when it's not going to work is going to be in the middle of winter, and I have a feeling it's going to be really expensive. So I do have some money on hand. Why don't I just update this furnace now, and then I'll put the paint on the wall and I'll rent this baby. We'll be good to go. So I call up, get a furnace guy. He comes over and he says, yeah, we can do this for you, but got some news for you. Your electrical panel won't support a modern furnace. And I said, what do you mean? What is that? So this thing was like 60 amps. So a lesson in electrical panels. I didn't know anything about that stuff, right? So thankfully, I had a tenant's dad who owned an electrical company. I immediately called him up, and they come over. At the moment, I know it's now in hindsight, but regardless, said, let's update that thing and rewire the house, I guess. Let's just do it all. I didn't realize you could just update the panel without rewiring, but let's just do it. So I'm like, well, now it's a new furnace. Got a decent deal on rewiring this whole house, but then I was like, okay, I'm still going to paint the walls. What else does this house need? Okay, I'm in this bathroom now, and my standards for any rental properties that I own is I would reside in them. That's my standard for the most part. I want to be proud of what I own. So I look at this bathroom and I say, wow, the year is 2020. Everyone wants a shower probably. There's no shower in this tub, right? So I thought, well, I guess I'll just learn how to tile a shower in real quick, and I'll redo this small little bathroom. So I'm like, I'll put that on the list. And since I'm updating the furnace, who doesn't want air conditioning? Let's put that on the bill too. We'll get a brand new HVAC system in here. And then I get looking in the windows, and like half of them are like rotted out. And I'm like, well, this is how I'm thinking. But I'm like, well, if this furnace is like high efficiency, we're going to upgrade to the high efficiency one. Well, you want efficient windows, so now we're going to replace those things. So I call my friend, he comes over, Adam. Okay, so he comes over, and I'm like, I don't know anything about any of this stuff. I know how to paint walls, and that's about it. So he's like, yeah, I'll do these window installs for you. And then I'm like, well, I've gone this far. I rip out all the dog piss carpet, and it's disgusting. I'm like, well, hardwood floors. I love hardwood floors. I'll learn how to I think you can refinish them. I just refinished my little living room in my own duplex, so I knew I could get some sanders and do that project. I was like, well, refinish those floors. Well, finally, this kitchen works, but the reality is I'm now updating this, for the most part, whole house without opening the walls. I might as well put a brand new kitchen in, so I just start ripping that thing out. And this quick little paint project turned into 3 months of my life in the middle of the pandemic, kind of the summer, super stressed out, working my ass off because I had people lined up wanting to rent this thing. And it forced me to kind of rehab a house. And upon doing that, my client work was kind of like slowing a little bit, pandemic. But I did the project, and right at the end of it, one of my clients reached back out to me. They're like, hey, I know you're kind of half in, half out. Do you want to do this video project? And I'm thinking, well, I just spent $30,000 on this house rehab that I didn't really have, and most of it's on credit cards. So yes, what are you going to pay me? And he tells me a number. The number is $12,000, and I think this is important in my story. I said, I will do it. I will go make $12,000 for a month of work. Yes, let me make these videos for you. So I get this project, sit down on my computer. Maybe I'm being lazy, I don't know what it is, but I cannot do this project. And so I take a little vacation, go to the Grand Canyon, get out of town, run away from work, probably kind of celebrate this like stressful period of my life for 3 months. And then I come on that trip, I realized like I'm officially done. No matter what you could pay me to do my past career, I couldn't do it anymore. And this was now the new thing I want to do. Even though it was like the hardest thing I've ever done, and at the time it seemed hard and stressful, it was. But it was also like fulfilling, and it occupied my brain and passion in a different way. So I got back to Des Moines, and I was like, hey client, I'm so sorry, I can't do this. I'm 100% done with this. I messaged all my current clients and projects lined up, and I said, I'm officially setting sail, I'm not doing this anymore, but here's some referrals. I'm gonna go find another house to remodel, and this is now my new career. So I think it took like 3.5 years to jump ship and go full time into it.
Okay, so financially, that sounds scary as hell. Full-time real estate rehab, like you're not making money doing that except rent that comes in, right? So like in your mind, being financial savvy as you are, do you remember what your bills were? And you're like, I just got to cover that nut. Did you how did that go?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number of my bills, but I know there's a jumping off point of, I'd reached a point, I think, in cash flow. I think my freedom number was my cost of living, which I believe I could get free housing plus $3,000 a month. I was free, right? So I think between my rentals, my units, I think I got to that point. So I was like, I knew I was making a lot more money in my previous career, but this was like, I'm officially, quote, free, which frees up my time and I can go focus on something different. So I had reached that point, and I'd been to that point for like a little bit, I think, but going through that experience of remodeling that house, feeling fulfilled and passion and challenged in a whole completely different way, I was like, I just can't go back to what I was doing before. It was like letting the cat out of the bag. But back to the point, I said I had maxed out my credit cards. I had like sunk 30 grand in this house, so I had 20 grand in down payment. I'm like 50 grand in. And this is where like things start to change, probably helps give me the jump off. I've been talking with my friends, he's a big time investor, and my strategy was just save half my money so I can just put down payments. 20% down, now it's gonna be my path to freedom. And he's like, dude, I'm telling you all day, man, you're doing it the slow, expensive way. You need to be like paying in cash, fix this shit up, and then go refinance it. And I was like, that sounds really hard, complicated. I don't understand what you're talking about, auction buys, all this stuff. But I had just got this house I sunk 50 grand into, and I'm decent at spreadsheets, and I'm looking at my cash on cash return, and I'm like, this is terrible. This does not meet my metric of 20% cash on cash return. I need to get, hopefully, my construction costs back out of this thing. So I like started calling around, got a line into some banker, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I bought this house for $90,000. I put 20 into it, so it's got to be worth $120,000, right? That's my hope. And so he's like, yeah, we'll finance this thing, blah, 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 refinance it. So they send the appraiser out, do all this stuff, and it appraises for like $160,000. So again, back to the spreadsheet thing, I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, okay, I'm pretty decent with this little spreadsheet thing. And okay, if this is right, at closing, I'm gonna get this check, and I'm still gonna have 20%, they're gonna finance it 80% loan to value, so I'll still have 20% equity in the property if I decide to sell it. And it still cash flows me like $300 a month. And kind of back to that first rental where I was like, in theory, this seems great, but it wasn't until going through it, like getting that first rent check, it was like, so there I am at First National Bank in West Glen, and the guy slid, we closed, signed some documents, I get a check for $54,000, and I'm like, well, I put $50,000 into this, I'm getting more back than what I put into it, but also if I sold this house today, it's worth like another $30,000 or $40,000, whatever it is. I go over to Smoothie King, just right next door, I get a big smoothie to celebrate, this is how I party, and I'm like, in the Prius, drinking the smoothie, and I'm like, I need to do this again. Ding, 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 ding. But that kind of gave me my reserves. Like it took off that pressure at least of that construction cost I sunk in there. Like I didn't know you could increase forced appreciation, increase the value of a property, and refinance it. Like I was not at that level because I was buying like turnkey places and I was pretty hands off. So by accident, I rehabbed a house and I was forced into a position to refinance it. So it forced me to go into this situation my buddy was telling me to do the entire time. And once I did it, I was like, oh my God. So like this is at least kind of a path to unlock some capital, but also kind of less risky, like as far as like, you don't just buy a house, put a bunch more money into it, and it just sits there. Like there's a way to kind of revolve your capital to do more projects. But essentially I was like, no more video work. I just gotta find the next house. I'm 100%, if I could just do this again, I just wanna focus on one thing. Let's do it again, baby.
Perfect. So we're gonna skip the middle part, and we're gonna come to like the last year, where I know that you've had properties that have sat for a while, right? So you accumulated, quote unquote, too many properties.
True.
How is that like, why has that happened?
So speaking to my new friend who we talk online, but now we're offline buddies, Ryan over here, and I was telling him how I could easily you could discuss some numbers, and I would say in the last year or two, I've made a $100,000 mistake easily by sequencing of events. So now I started jumping into a game that's much more expensive and repercussions and so on. I had a pretty crazy year where I doubled my portfolio. So I got to 10 properties. That was my goal in 10 years. I made it there in 4, I think. And then I opened a whole new world, which would unlock more capital, private money investors, refinancing properties, and got really excited about this thing that I just did that works. So I ended up doubling my portfolio, and I've now had some projects, at least 2 houses I know that sat empty for 2 years. And when you think about the cost on those, it doesn't make one feel very good inside.
Why have they sat and your other projects have been priority?
Yeah. We will call this opportunity cost. So Calvin went from, it could be part of my personality, but he went from learning how to paint some walls, doing that Beaverdale house I was talking about, did everything besides opening the walls. And the next house, I was like, I bet the next house is gonna be a gut job, whatever that means. And the next house I got, I was excited, I'm like, this is a gut job. Let me rip out this plaster and lath and move some walls. This will be easy, right? So get in there with not a whole lot of experience, but I'm not afraid to dive in. And I mean, that one turned out well, but then I bought one right after that and a few others that turned out to be insanely giant projects. There's this house I got from a wholesaler, this bungalow which I loved. I went in, it was like $60,000 for it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer. We'll just get in here, gut all the walls out, $25,000 later, and 2 months later we'll be out of here and this thing will be amazing. Let me leave this other gut job I just started and go start on this one now. And I had got some projects, taking on projects that are way bigger than I had no idea, and maybe, the challenge of them, once you open up, realize structural stuff, just things you don't know, and you're learning a lot. And then I was trying to hire people to work with me, and I didn't understand exactly what I was doing, but you're just trying to survive. And I think the answer to the question is some have sat longer because, well, one is a capital thing. All of a sudden your capital sunk into a project that takes you a year of your life. And someone's like, well, dude, why didn't you do that smaller project real quick? And I was like, what you understand is every dollar I have is invested in this house. I need to get it done and rented before I can start ripping that one apart. we'll be there in 2 months, trust me. And then before you know it, a year goes by, and you're like, wow, now that deal I bought before, maybe it still works, but it's not as incredible as it would have been. And so I've got some projects, I've done at least probably twice now, that like opportunity costs end up resources. Money is a resource, but time. And once you get into these things, and my level of whatever it is, like I take them to the extreme now because I want to build it for the next 30 years, so I don't have to touch this thing. But when you talk about the opportunity cost of spending a year on one project versus like churn and burn out of 2 or 3 smaller ones, it's just poor planning, absolutely. But have to get through those projects to free up the capital in a sense.
Did you make any poor purchases? And if you did, and you don't have to go into details on each specific one, but like what would you have done differently?
What would I do differently?
We aren't telling you what to buy.
What I would do differently is like one mistake I'd really made is trying to hyper focus. And so if you get a project or two, all of a sudden I got really excited about the possibilities, and you get some people you're working with, and you're thinking, oh yeah, we can like crank through all this stuff really fast. And you realize you don't have maybe the people or the systems in place to effectively try to work on multiple projects at a time. So I definitely made a mistake for maybe it was a year, but jumping across like a few different houses and projects where it's like, let me work over here for a little bit. Oh, cool, we've done great work. Let's go over here today. We'll work on this a little bit. Oh, let's go back there. And before you know it, a month goes by. And like from the outside in hindsight, people would be like, what are you doing? And like you see that, but the biggest mistake I would say is not just staying hyper focused. Like I know some people on my network, they'll get a project and they're really smart about it, probably how I was earlier on, where you get it and you're like, well, yeah, it takes every penny I have. So let me just hyper focus on this. And I think maybe one of the problems or what I would do differently was, we didn't quite get into it, but I got into the whole world of private lending, bringing in other people, borrowing their money to purchase projects that allowed me to accumulate a few, put them on the sidelines. Then you think, oh, we'll burn through this house, get to this one. But if I could go back in time, I definitely would have not made a couple acquisitions and would like absolutely put every resource I have, mental energy, time, money, people, onto one project and got that thing done. And then maybe looked for like the next project versus like getting multiple and putting them in holding. In hindsight, I'd always have, my dream is to get to the point where I just have one house I'm working on a project and I have one in holding that's queued up.
On that, why don't you just hire it out? Like why don't you just hire the work instead of do it yourself?
Because I like to work harder and not smarter, Darson. Why don't I hire it out? Well, I know once I start getting more into it, I do have a sense of fulfillment and some passion doing the work. There's a sense of curiosity. One thing I know I want to do once I started to gut houses was I told myself, once I made the career change, I thought I would like to spend the next couple years and get in the trenches and learn everything about the investment that I am buying. Because at the end of the day, like I'd buy turnkey houses and I didn't know anything about them in the very beginning. I didn't know windows, furnace, electrical. But I started to think, I was like, wait a minute, if I'm going to buy an asset, a thing that's an investment, the more knowledge I have about something, the more I can do with it. So I wanted to get in for a couple of years and learn everything. Now, do you need to go the path and be hands-on like a contractor? No, because again, I know people in my own circle that have never swung a hammer and made a fortune having other people swing hammers for them. So you have to ask yourself at the end of the day, like, why are you doing it? Is it for a money aspect, or is it for like a fulfillment, curiosity? But I wanted to spend at least a couple of years to fully understand home remodeling and like home building or whatever. So that way I could get to a point of, say, hiring it out so I know what I'm looking for, how it should be done, relatively what costs and things are. Which one could easily argue definitely like has limited me big time. The other one could say maybe it's like planting the knowledge in the seed that will only like empower me moving forward.
So it's one of those like a step back to 3 steps forward in the future, right? So the one of the things that Calvin, if you don't follow him on Instagram, like absolutely follow him. It's entertaining and educational. But basically, when I see him do work, I'm like, dude, you need to hire this out. You're doing it way too nice for the properties that you have in the areas that you have. No offense, right? But every single time he goes, well, I plan on being very hands-off in the future. Like this is for the long term, right? And so then I take my step back and I'm like, okay, would I work really freaking hard for 5 years so that I don't have to do almost anything for the next 30? Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. He's just doing it in a different way than I am.
My philosophy is, I've got to the point where, I mean, going back to the guy who painted walls and now the fact that I was working on a Prius with my Ryobi miter saw, right? And a couple years later, I have ProMaster with about every tool you need to build a house from scratch. And the fact that on my journey, I've got to learn how to use these tools. But I find it empowering that I can just jump in, solve a problem, but also like build and create. And so I get into these things, sometimes like I get into these houses, maybe it's been around for 70, 100 years, like it's got some life on it. So if I'm going to get in there now, I'm thinking about, my mind is very long term. I said, if I want to own this thing, all these books, these things I read, the people who like made it, their wisdom, and say, man, if I want this rental property to pay me for 20 years, I've got some energy, I got some resource right now. I've got some energy on my side. I don't got the kids and the family sucking up my time necessarily, or taking my time. So I've got time on I've got a little bit more time on my hands. So now is the time to get in, give this thing some love, even if it means structural, whatever it is, to put the work in for, even if it's 6 months. If I think to myself, this is now my full-time job, so it's not like I have a job elsewhere, this is my job. If I can get in for 6 months and set this baby up so it's gonna pay me for 15 or 20 years, if we're gonna talk about a return on time, I feel like for me, definitely a good way to do it. Like I've got a couple of projects where I'm like, holy crap, like that was 2 years ago. I remember like in the moment that sucked, but now I'm like, haven't thought about that house for 2 years besides it sends me rent and everything seems to be pretty good on it. So kind of like long-term thinking.
When you started out 3, 4, 5 years ago to now, your goal then was $400,000, right? Or rough, right? That passively, what's it bring in? Now what is it, and how has that changed?
And I say 400,000 because this number is important, because back to Mr. Money Mustache, retirement is a number. So he would say, and that was based off what is your cost of living at that time, and then what's the runway, right? So if you have whatever it was at the time, maybe I need 40,000. I don't know what the math is. We don't need to get into it. But the point is, it was hard. He's like, work an actual tangible number that you need to get to, and then you know when that's invested, it's going to pay you every year, and you're good. And so at age 30, when I made that number, figured it out at my expenses and cost of living, then it was 440,000. I knew that would be like the retirement kind of goal thing, right? Now it has definitely changed for me in the sense of, wanting a cash flow goal, or if I've gotten to it, so I have even more time freedom to be able to do more adventures, go back to climbing mountains, travel the world, do other building endeavors like build out vans or tiny homes. I've doubled that and then some as far as like on paper to get into a number that I can't believe if you're looking like equity position that I could just sell it all and walk away and be in a pretty good spot. But now it becomes something, I feel like, I don't know if this is true, but it seems like a lot of people's journeys, you hear people when they get to certain levels or when you reach a goal, it's like, you can be content with it, but it's not nearly as satisfying as the journey that it takes to get to the goal. So like, it's funny, you'd sit behind the computer, for me, it's like, oh, if I can get to $400,000 in net worth and like get $4,000 a month, I've made it. But then what, right? It's always the, but then what? So for me, it just opens up the world of, like, now my brain is starting to conceive the idea of like, yeah, I could build a house from scratch. And I've got 2 lots I now own with my brother, and the whole idea of possibly doing spec houses and just like the journey of my journey, whatever that is. So I've met the initial goal, which now then always like reveals new goals. But I think it's good to be focused on a goal to get to that and then see what else like lights you up inside. And right now, that's why I think even the last couple of years of learning how to do the renovation aspect, it empowers me in these other areas of my life that I want to do.
You started in 16, 17, through 18, 19, the pandemic. From what you know, do you think someone could start today doing what you did and build that revenue machine over 3 years?
Great question. When I look back at my journey, again, back on the side of luck and fortune, rates bottom out, I was able to refinance. Like the idea that I could use the value of properties to accumulate more properties, the idea to take 3 properties to buy 3 more properties, and in theory, it didn't cost me $1 out of my own pocket. And it's like, that's how you start to learn to scale and such. So I feel like there's a couple of pivotal moments that allowed. Now, to answer the question, could somebody do exactly what I've done in the next 3 years, even if rates go from 7 to 10%, 15 to 20? And the answer is yes, because what I am doing is like not revolutionary or new or anything. The little bit that I've applied is from books that were written in the 70s and 80s. And then I follow and listen to people online. Like sometimes I dive into bigger pockets. Like I kind of quit listening to a lot of stuff. I just focus on what I need to do. And it's like you hear people's stories out there and I'm like, oh man, I need to do, like I can't conceive what they're doing. There's people out there, it's like 1 or 2 years and it's like 100 units, creative financing, this and that. And I'm just like, I can't fathom. Like there are many people out there who have already done it or who are doing it. Like I'm definitely not an anomaly. And I would think on a scale of all that, I'm like barely on the scale at all. Like it's a very, really small fish or small thinking. So absolutely all day long, I think one way or another, people could do it. Maybe it's not through bank finance or whatever. Maybe it's through people who on contract, they own a bunch of properties, they're 80, 90 years old, but they still want the money and they want to be the bank on the deal. Like there's ways to do it. There's stuff, I've talked to some people, like Mitch Cluzy one time I had a phone call, and I was like, he was talking things and I was like, I now feel like an idiot because the things he's talking about that I can't even comprehend, right? So like, and there are people, it sounds like next month you're gonna have some creative financing off, like getting into those things, I can't even comprehend some of them. So I think all day long there's more than one way to the mountaintop. All day long. Mount Everest has multiple routes up it, tallest mountain in the world. You can kind of follow my path. There's people who've done different, better paths. So I think all day long someone can do what I did easily. I mean, not easily, but it can be done.
One step back and then we'll do Q&A. So if you have questions coming up, get them ready. How did you learn to like use a tape measure? Like that sounds stupid, but like little things like that, how did you learn? Do you literally learn from books or YouTube or like what did that look like?
Yeah, definitely I have a YouTube degree by now. And maybe it kind of came naturally. Like I was a sports computer kid growing up, but the reality is once I got more into this, I do remember as a teenager I was roofing houses, and my dad was a self-taught carpenter. I grew up on a farm, so maybe some of the hard work, some of those things come naturally because I was around it. But I mean, a lot of the stuff, I mean, we live in one of the greatest eras ever where, yeah, I've got some books on it, but I hardly read them. I'm a very visual guy. I will just go onto message boards, find home building. I will watch YouTube videos. There are people documenting their entire journeys of how to build a house from scratch. So when I have a project coming up, like call it tiling, right? And even if I've done a bunch of tile projects, I'll continue to watch tile videos because I'm like, man, I really suck at this compared to watching how clean and fast these guys are. So I will just want people putting the information out there for free. You can learn from these things, and then you just apply it. And also in the field, like application. So getting the tape measure out and making thousands of wrong measurements, like the fact that, you know, I teach people this now, but like a tape measure, you have a hook or push. It will read differently based on the end of your tape measure of how you move it, and it blows people's minds, and it blew my mind, like simple tools. But YouTube all day long. Like when I talk to my parents, grew up, they'd renovate our houses slowly throughout the years, and my mom and dad would tell a story, and they didn't know. My mom's like, we had no books, no internet. We would just like go to the hardware store, buy some drywall, and just go home and try to figure it out. We have no idea what we're doing. But now, like, there's people on their free time just showing you exactly how to do it. We're in the greatest time ever. So the more you do it, like the easier it comes. That's like, I was thinking about this the other day, like as I get into it, I feel like I'm starting to hit a flow a bit in my projects where it's fun, where things take maybe half the time, or I feel confident now about them because you have a little bit of experience. And man, that first renovation was really hard, and mine now, by scale, keep getting a little bit harder, but not like, it's fun because you get to rinse and repeat the skills. So anyone who like buys a house and you do your first LVP flooring project or even paint, like it is stressful because you just don't have the repetition or the knowledge or learning like industry little secrets how to be faster. You know, if you're a flooring guy all day long, you're gonna have all the tips and tricks, right? But as far as reading tape measure, I think I bought a tape measure. I just started using it. I was thinking about, it was like so I've been organizing all my photos on my computer for my phone, 20-some thousand photos, just so I can get them all like organized in all my house renovations and projects. Just to be able to look, because I always document the process, so it's pretty cool to look back and see it. I'm like, holy shit, I did that and it's happening, right? But in there, I saw like in my second duplex property I lived in, it was like, let me try to build this little breakfast bar, this little shelf. That probably took me a week to put glue and screw 3 boards together. They're like super tiny. I was really proud of it, right? I'm like, but I still love it. I'll go in that unit and I'll be like, yeah, this is cool. Like it started here. This is one part of the evolution. Like every house and property I brought a new opportunity, a challenge, an obstacle to learn and overcome, to add skills to tools to my tool belt.
Okay, Q&A. Anyone have any questions for Calvin? How do you do it? Where'd the money come from? Anything?
That's one thing we didn't talk about, the private money.
Go ahead, Junior. I'll just give you this.
What would you tell investors right now that say they want to wait because interest rates are higher?
It's probably heard it 1,000 times. Like best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is now. Buy real estate and wait. I did see a good answer this other day online, and someone said, trying to think very logically to it. It said 3 things are going to happen if you bought a house today with interest rates. 1, the interest rate's going to be locked in, right? 2, rates will drop so you can refinance. Or 3, rates are going to go up and you're going to be happy that you bought a house at that rate. So kind of thinking about that specifically, if it's the right deal, every deal has to make sense on some numbers, but getting the deal, and you never know what the future holds. You never know 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now what you can do with that property. If you bought it at 7%, maybe rates drop to 5, maybe increase in value. Like we just went from a position of historic lows 6 months ago to now the highest since 2001, so in 20 years. So I would say it's important to just, if the numbers and deal kind of make sense, get it. Especially if you're in for the long haul. My brain, I don't focus on a 1-year kind of thing. When I went back to that very first spreadsheet I did, when I would look at a 1-year calculation, I'd be like, why would anyone buy a house to make $200 a month on cash flow? You add it together, this is silly, right? But if you plan that out over 10 years and you understand how loan amortization works, cash flow, all the numbers, you're like, oh, I see something bigger here. So to answer your question, I would all day, if the numbers and project seems to make sense, I would absolutely encourage control. It seems like a big thing in real estate. So acquisition and control of an asset that you may be able to do something with in the future down the road. The opposite is if you didn't control an asset 5 years from now, what are you going to think about? Like, to me, it gives you options in the future versus not acquiring something. Yeah, so right now I am definitely very currently hands-on. It's one, I need the cash flow and capital to fund my current projects and lifestyle, right, of being a contractor. My current philosophy is self-managing, because I'm somewhat of a people's person, so I don't mind being friendly with my tenants. But more so from my limited experience of talking with property management and say having 20 plus tenants for 5 years, is there's no shortage of horror stories out there. If you ever talk to someone about buying a rental property, you're going to hear the world's worst stories left and right. Even people who don't own rentals, they've got stories to tell you about why you shouldn't do it. The stories you don't get to hear are the unsexy, boring story, which is like, hey, that tenant that I have for 5 years who pays her rent on time all the time, I never hear from her. I say this because most of my tenants are really boring. I don't hear from them. So I self-manage because I can do the work. So I like to sometimes sub it out to handyman, but I'll do it. For the most part, self-managing requires this. You need to fill the unit, right? So you need to put it online. So I have some photos. I put it on Zillow.com. And sometimes if I'm feeling overly ambitious, I'll go to Facebook, but most times just Zillow. Zillow pushes out to 6 different websites. People come to you. That's where renters are looking for places. I've never put a sign in the yard ever. So that's filling the place, right? I talked to property management company earlier on. They'd call me. They said, yeah, well, first month's rent and deposit, and we'll find you a tenant. And I'm like, so for $1,000, you're going to put someone in here plus charge me monthly? Like, I can also just put the thing online and meet people for a walkthrough and get a tenant in there. And now when it comes from, say, tenant issues, maintenance. So what happens is, tenant says, hey, Calvin, we've got this problem here. Here's a photo of it, phone number. And I said, oh man, there's water coming out of the toilet everywhere. Let me get out the phone and call the plumber. The plumber's gonna go over there and solve it. So I just fielded a phone call. And so when I talk to property managers, and again, this is just by a little bit of experience of talking with them, if I'm gonna pay a premium of 8, 10% or whatever for them to manage it, but then they field the phone call and then charge me for the plumber anyways, I will save the 10% and I will field the phone call all day long. So right now, currently self-managed. I mean, candidly, I want to get to a position where, say, backpacking around or traveling the world where it's like, I can't field those and then I'll be like property management at that point. But right now, like my experience, tenants are rather boring. You get a few really interesting stories, but it doesn't take much effort to pick up the phone and just call the problem solve. And I figured the expense, when I run the numbers, the expense on that doesn't seem to make it worthwhile.
So I'm going to add to that, and y'all probably can see where I'm going to go here. You probably have properties that are nicer than what many of us might have, and so your problems are smaller, right? Or you've done the dirty work on the back end so that there isn't that big of a plumbing issue type thing. So if you redo your properties to a very high standard, the property management after leasing it up is much less time consuming.
Yeah, that's one important thing there. Just because you brought that up as far as, yeah, standards nicer, whatever they may be. One thing someone gave me advice, and one thing I try to do now with all my properties if I get into any renovation, but you try to future-proof your problems. So main one is, say, plumbing and stuff. So I'll go in there, I'm gonna cut out the cast iron and get rid of all that shit. I'm gonna update my whole plumbing. I'm gonna try to update the systems, which are usually the main breakdowns in a house. When some I've come to learn about, a little bit about, reframing, building houses, like now I understand how the house goes and gets put together. When you understand what a house actually is and what usually goes wrong, it's like, it's some 2x4s with some sheeting, some drywall, some siding outside. Now you got some plumbing in there, some HVAC. Like you start to see where the real problems are going to be from. So you try to mitigate and eliminate those problems. DIY to roof. Actually, it's funny. I have not done any drywall yet, and it's all been subbed out. I can't believe I've avoided it because they've all been pretty bigger drywall projects. And I was gonna drywall the whole house after I gutted it, and then I was running out of time, and I got a lead on these 2 guys, and then I watched these 2 guys put the drywall up. And then the next, like in a day and a half, it was all done, and the finisher was there. And I was like, this would have taken me a month. I'm going to spend that money all the time. What would I sub out? All of it. No.
That's not true.
It's not true. Oh well, plumbing. Okay, actually plumbing now because at this Beaverdale house, I did the plumbing, and then it kind of worked, and then it did have to be fixed. But I've done some other plumbing stuff where I did it just fine, but the amount of store runs with plumbing, and like there's just so many stupid little pieces that go into plumbing. I'm in aisle 12 with all pieces laid out, doing trip number 15, and now I've gotten to the point thinking I got a couple plumbers in my network. I will pay the premium, and I don't even want to think about it's stupid easy. I even have all the tools to do the PEX and the PVC, all the pipe and stuff, but it's like I'll just let them do that part. Like I guess I'll just be covered in plaster and carpentry stuff, but plumbing I now just sub that out and it feels good. And that's part 2 I think is important here is I'm trying to get better about this, but even if you have one property, I think you try to zoom out and start to, or talk to other investors, like what is gonna go wrong? It's not what may go wrong, what will go wrong. So what are the maintenance calls that are gonna happen? And can you just start to create a system before they actually happen, right? So who are the 5 plumbers you're just gonna call, 5 HVACs? So it's not as stressful when all of a sudden someone calls you and says, my toilet's everywhere, and you're like, fuck, who do I call? Like try to think about the beforehand. So you start to build that Rolodex, at least like an action plan. But now building, I've got a network of some really great people, electrician, HVAC guys, the systems where like it is feeling great to like just call on those people and go solve it now. And because time is money eventually, and like some of those maintenance things feels amazing just to have someone else to do it. But I would say plumbing, great question, Lauren. I mean, just buy. So what I like to do is this morning I was having a smoothie and I was talking to Corey, the owner of the shop, and just he sees me all the time. We're talking about what I do, and he's like, man, I wish we would have sold our last house. We'd have 2 houses now. He's like, God, what you're doing is pretty smart now that I'm older. He's in his 50s. And there's no shortage of, I like to tap into people's wisdoms or regret of being like, I wish I would have done this. And when it comes to investing, time is your greatest asset. If you understand compound interest, the more time you have in, the more money and stuff you're gonna make. So to be able to stumble on something in your 20s, I mean, I was a late bloomer at age 30 to finally get in the game. And the last 6 years of my life, blink, they're speeding up, they're going faster, and I'm like, it happens so fast. So the sooner you can get into this, and I think about people consuming this content, even thinking about getting their first project early 20s, time's on your side. So it's like you could speed up your life, whatever may happen in 5 years. Like, forget, regardless of the age, whether you're 20 or 50, the time thing is still relevant. The time is gonna pass regardless of how you spend it. So all day long, if you're in your 20s, like, whatever you have to do, W-2 job, partner with somebody, private lending, creative financing, the fact you're even thinking like that, I commend you, and just jump in, or try to get something that obviously works for you all day long. That's my thing, I guess.
So you asked that question. My instinct, my instant thought process was, well, it doesn't matter if you're 20 or you're 50. It's a 10-year game, right? It's at 10 years, what can I do, right? And can you last, right? So I listen to a lot of Gary Vee, and Gary Vee's like, age is effing stupid. Like, it doesn't matter. It's the work you want to put in for the next 10 years or the next 30 years or whatever. So like, right when you said that, I was like, oh, it doesn't, like, 20-year-olds, yes. I would say everyone should buy a rental property or a property every single year. That's the end game. But if you want to go above and beyond,
especially as the younger you are, most likely you don't have the variable of, say, maybe family involved, or you have more time on your side. So like, you're willing to maybe live in places that you wouldn't live when you're 35 with a couple kids, and a spouse, another person in your life. So knowing that, you have to think about variables that are involved in the decision. That I would say, candidly, if I'm thinking about my own journey in my 20s, I had a whole lot less responsibility and more independence, so I could take more risks, right? So that's where I think that's a really huge asset to jump into, that you hear this all the time. You talk to people. I'm an HVAC guy. He's been doing HVAC for 18 years, and he says, man, I would love to be doing what you're doing. I'd love to remodel a house. He's like, I got a couple kids, wife. He goes, full-time job. I don't have the time, man, but I would love to do that. And there's no shortage of those stories that as we get older and we round out, can't speak necessarily, but I can see it from some other people, but you add in a family in the mix, you have more variables, you have less time, you have more commitments, responsibilities that are going to be more roadblocks to jump into the real estate journey. Not saying it's not done, because there's people who have done it, but that's a common thread amongst individuals. So my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was Miss Rachel Brown right there. That's my source. This is a great question. So again, that's something that changed my journey. After I decided to go 100% full-time into real estate, and I was like, I just want to find my next house project, I didn't know where it was going to come from, but all of a sudden an opportunity, about a couple weeks later, I made the decision, it popped up and came in front of me, and I went and saw it. And the ask was like $75,000. And this was the first one I'd walked into it, and I was like, oh man. In the past, every deal I've done was conventional financing, bank 20% down. And I knew this was not going to qualify for conventional lending by any means. And so I was kind of looking at it, and I was like, that means I think I have to find $75,000 cash, which I do not have. But I asked the question, how? It's one of my favorite questions from the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. Try to take your mind out of I can't and just ask how. So in the meantime, somewhere in there, I think I was asking how, and Darson had alluded to maybe in a conversation about how he had bought a rental or some rental properties using private money. And so I was like, hey Darson, tell me about this thing, how does it work? And he's like, here's the forms, here's the contract, here's how you do it. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I said, more so it's read this book, and it was some book, How to Raise $250,000 in 30 days on Amazon. Lady talks about all types of creative deals out there. And so you add those few pieces of information, and someone in my life, this specifically was a family member. I had been sharing my story with them for multiple years, the houses I was buying, I was sharing all the work that I was doing, and I had just been talking to them about how, okay, I just finished that project, and I was excited about it, but I came across this new one. I was just thinking, I was like, yeah, hey family member, I was like, this one's unique. I was like, I found my next project, but it needs $75,000 cash, so I'm not sure how I'm going to get that, but I'm going to think about it. And then we had some more conversations back and forth. Darson's thread about borrowing private money, that book, and then it was like, wait a minute. And then I decided how to understand using, promissory notes, private mortgages, things like that to bring in, because I didn't want to do an equity partner. I wanted to keep 100% control. I figured I'm the guy doing all the work. I've had some partnerships in my past on a documentary film project, other things throughout my life, and when you add in another partner, there's no shortage of horror stories about partnerships, not to deter anybody. But I was like, I like the idea of keeping this 100% me. I'd like to just borrow money from somebody on a guaranteed return that I will pay them back, because I just did this fix it up, refinance it model, so I know it works. I'm going to do it again. So I worked a deal with some of my network. This one happened to be a family member at the time, and came in to be a private money partner. And I proved myself again on that deal, which then opened up funding to more through that avenue. But then there's other people in my life where I was sharing my story online, and other people in my network. I can't remember how the conversations came up, but one guy specifically, he was an acquaintance. We'd never met in person. And I think Darson brought me a deal actually, and it was the Milton House. It was an opportunity, really good project, and I was thinking this one's unique because owner finance or creative financing, where the sellers wanted to sell it on contract for 6 months. They wanted a down payment, so they wanted to sell it for like 110. The down payment was like 40 grand. Sorry to get in this. I think it's kind of important, maybe, but more private money. And so my brain went to, well, I don't need $110,000 in this deal. I need $40,000. And so one of my friends, he'd been seeing what I was doing. He's like, man, like, is there an opportunity to like invest in you? How's it work? And so I got his money. It was like 15 grand. I was like, okay, now I need $25,000, right? There's my question of how. And then there's an acquaintance online who I forgot how we were talking. And he's like, yeah, I'll do a deal with you. And we did a deal and that worked out great. The private money things. I was sharing my story constantly, showing the work that I was doing, like building trust, credibility. And what I thought was interesting in this acquaintance, I eventually, after like a year, I met him in person at his house. And he's like, man, my girlfriend couldn't believe I'd never met you. I just gave you $30,000. And I said, I know, right? Crazy, huh? And I said, why did you give me $30,000? I've never met you, never even had coffee or anything. And he said, I saw a video of you. We got some mutual friends, but he goes, I saw a video of you online. You were in a bathroom, and you were talking about this laser you had out and how this should line up with this, this, and that. Like, this would be a good design or construction. And he goes, I didn't know exactly what you're talking about, but I knew that you seemed to know what you were doing, and you really cared a lot, and that'd be the type of person I want to invest with. That seemed very trustworthy. So by sharing my story, just candidly through my network, has opened up opportunities, and then understanding how to do private lending or borrow money at X% for a term, whether it's like 6 months or a year at 10%, just understand how to apply those things, and having a track record and proving myself and showing it, it's opened up some doors.
That was a longer story than I thought we were going to get to private money, but
I
very relevant. And like, if you don't follow him on Instagram, you need to. It's both entertaining and educating.
What's his Instagram?
I have no idea. What's your Instagram?
Just my name.
Calvin Johansson. I'll send it out in an email.
Subpar contracting.
Subpar contracting. That's funny because he started out that way, and I was like, that's catchy, but not. It's actually bad. Any other questions, and we'll get back to the networking. Sweet. Okay, so thank you for coming. Again, next month we'll have another guest speaker. I believe we'll do some type of creative financing. I've got one lined up. I just want to verify he's not here tonight, so I want to make sure that that's going to happen. If not, we'll have someone else. But thank you for coming. We'll see you.